Hi, Mark.
Morning.
How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Good, good. We'll follow the same pattern as we did on Thursday with Danny. Right, and we're recording now. Have we started to let people through?
Coming in now. We're up to 50 so far.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. For those who've joined us, we'll just hang fire for a minute or two, and then we'll get going. So we're expecting about 150 or so. How are we looking, Brian?
We're up to 70.
Okay. I'll give it another minute and then we'll get going. Right, we'll make a start. Thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome and Croeso pawb, Bordar. This is a very important and pressing topic for us all, and I know many of you too. So please do take notes if you need to, but be aware that we will be sharing all of the recording and the slides at the end of this session, and we'll repeat that and talk more to that as things go on. But thank you very much for joining us. This is our Radio Teleswitch information session. We will provide other opportunities to hear more about this, including at our Wales Fuel Poverty Forums over the coming months. But we're very keen today to host this information session with Ofgem and Energy UK to raise awareness of the switch off, delve into some of the detail, and importantly, provide a space for you to be able to ask questions of the regulator and the energy supply industry. Just to introduce myself, my name is Ben Saltmarsh. I work as Head of Wales for National Energy Action, or Head of NEA Cymru. I'm joined today by a few colleagues, including Danny Barnes at NEA, Jamie Flaherty from Ofgem, and David Speak and Mark Pitchford from Energy UK. They'll all introduce themselves in due course. This webinar will run from 11 AM to 12:30 PM. We estimate that the presentation between us all will take about half an hour, so that means there's plenty of time for questions, and please do ask questions throughout the webinar. We are on Zoom, as you'll know, so you can see and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. So please make use of the Q&A function on Zoom, which you can find in the toolbar at the bottom. Questions can be submitted, as I say, throughout the session, and we'll do our best to go through as many as we can after the presentation. And any questions we're unable to answer during the session, we'll do our best to address afterwards and circulate a summary of that. But as I say, the recording, the presentation and the slides, and the links to the resources, as well as a summary of the questions, will all be shared after too. So please do look out for that in the next couple of days. Just in terms of the objectives for today's session, kind of 6 main things that we want to cover. So what RTS, or Radio Teleswitch metering, is, and crucially where that's located, not just across Great Britain, but also within Wales. What are the impacts of the switch off, which is coming on the 30th of June this year, and also crucially, what options are available to those that currently have an RTS meter and would otherwise be affected. And then also finally, how we can advise and support them as trusted intermediaries of those households, and what information resources are available to us to help us do that. So of those with an RTS meter, it's very likely that there's going to be a disproportionate number either in or at risk of fuel poverty, particularly given prevailing circumstances. And as a result, colleagues at National Energy Action have been working very closely with Ofgem, Energy UK and others to help raise awareness of the issue and highlight the significant risk or detriment that it poses to both low-income and vulnerable households who we know could least afford it. So thank you very much for joining us, and let's start from the beginning. So what is a radio teleswitch meter? So some homes and businesses across the country have something called a radio teleswitch meter, also known as an RTS meter. That's how I'll refer to it from now on, otherwise this presentation will probably take an hour. It's designed to support those who use electricity for heating and hot water. So those might have storage heaters, panel heaters, immersion heaters, just as a few examples, some of which you typically charge up overnight, often when it's cheaper, depending on the tariff that you use. But the radio teleswitch service uses a radio signal to tell some older electricity meters when to switch between peak and off-peak rates, or day and night rates, as sometimes people know it. And there's about 700,000 RTS meters in situ across Great Britain currently, of which over 500,000 properties still depend on that signal, including about 14 or 15,000 in Wales, and they're spread all over the country. And suppliers have an urgent goal of upgrading all RTS meters across Wales and Great Britain, because the RTS signal will switch off from the 30th of June. So without the technology to tell RTS meters when to switch between off-peak and on-peak rates, they may no longer work properly, and it may mean that householders would lose access to their heating and hot water, or it would stop functioning as normal. So it's very serious, and it's very important that we raise awareness of this issue. So as I say, the switch off is from the 30th of June this year, 2025, in just over 4 months' time, and it needs to be switched off. It was first introduced in the mid-1980s, and it's now reached the end of its operational life. I'm sure colleagues will talk a little bit more to this later, but it was designed ultimately to enable large numbers of storage heaters and water heaters to be able to switch between day and night rates in a staggered way, rather than all at once, to avoid overburdening the network. But it's now an aging infrastructure that can't be replaced, and the equipment that produces that radio signal can't be adequately maintained anymore, and frankly it's at increasing risk of failure. So all electricity suppliers are contacting and have contacted impacted customers to offer them an upgrade to their meter before the RTS service ends on the 30th of June. So it's important to understand then who will be affected. As I say, there's about 14,000, 15,000 RTS meters in Wales alone, all of which need to be replaced by the 30th of June, and they're spread all over the country. By and large, wherever you live in Wales, there will be people in your local authority with an RTS meter, but there are higher densities or hotspots in the country too. So let me hand over to David now at Energy UK, who's going to give a little bit more detail on the numbers and the geography across Wales. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Ben. And morning, everybody. My name's David Speak. I'm working with Energy UK at the moment to work through the RTS replacement program. Energy UK is the trade association for the energy industry. We have over 100 members covering all sorts of organisations, suppliers, generators, aggregators, EV charging operators, really working on behalf of the major energy suppliers on this problem at the moment. And we're providing a central coordination function, because this is not something where suppliers are competing against each other. Of course, we just need to between us get to these customers and deliver the message that we want to upgrade their meters for them. And so it makes sense to have Energy UK spearheading this activity, where we are trying to engage with partner organisations such as yourselves to talk to this issue, and it means we don't have to have, or you don't have to have the conversation, 15 times over with 15 different suppliers. So, as Ben said, what we've done, part of the work that we've been taking forward is to understand, exactly where these customers are and how they're impacted, and we've pulled together the data across all suppliers and been able to map this out, and that is important to inform our engagement across the country. The map on the left-hand side, just to start at the very highest level, does show you the darker spots where just by absolute number of RTS meters, we've got some very highly impacted areas. We'll talk to Wales in just a second, but from right up in the north in the Orkneys and Shetlands, very, very dark red, as you can see, an area with no mains gas and lots and lots of RTS meters. And off the map on the bottom left-hand side, we've got Isles of Scilly as well. They've got quite a proportion of RTS meters too. But across the board, it's fair to say, Scotland are impacted. Wales not as much, but that's not to say that there's not a lot of customers here we want to talk to about this. And Ben, if we just pop onto the next slide, we'll have a little look at some of the areas in Wales. So a few maps here, and of course, I'm not expecting you to be able to really see a huge amount of what's going on in these maps, but there's a couple of messages behind what I've put onto the screen here. The large one on the left-hand side, as you can see, is the zoomed-in version of that overall GB hotspot map. And of course, we've got one or two areas within Wales which do sit in that more highly populated RTS meter category. And surprise, surprise, excuse me while I just turn the phone off. Surprise, surprise, we've got just those probably the link to density of population, to be quite honest with you. We've got Cardiff, we've got Swansea, we've got Aberystwyth there, and those are postcode districts with with hundreds of meters in them. Now, the ones that are in the lighter shades on the left-hand side there, we mustn't assume that there are no RTS meters there. In fact, there are lots, and I've just put that the small very top left map that makes Wales look like it's got some sort of disease. That is a map of full postcodes within Wales that are impacted, and guess what? Right there are full postcodes across the entirety of Wales that are impacted, and the blank areas in the middle tend to be the areas where there aren't many people living anyway. So the message is that they are all over Wales, and within your areas you will find these meters. I've pulled out Anglesey at the top right-hand side, okay, and I'm going to compare and contrast that with the satellite image I've got below the text as well. So Anglesey is an interesting one. Actually, not a huge number of RTS meters, but they are across all the postcodes within Anglesey. So what those dots represent on that map is full postcodes that do have an impacted property in, but we tend to have maybe one or two properties within that postcode that are impacted with an RTS meter. And that housing stock on Anglesey tends to be, 2/3 off the gas grid. Only a very small proportion of that is flats, purpose-built flats. And so contrast that with this satellite image where I've picked out a part of Cardiff Bay here. I've only got 3 dots on this one, impacted postcodes, but I've got dozens of properties in there because of the housing stock being 80s, 90s built, redevelopment area in middle of Cardiff Bay, and they are 4 or 5 story long and low small flats where, even though there's a gas mains in Cardiff, actually at the time it was much more straightforward to put in these sorts of properties an electric heated system with panel heaters, storage heaters. And so those areas of Cardiff have got hundreds and hundreds of RTS customers, whereas much broader, larger rural areas have got customers all over the place, but you tend to have a much less density of customers to work with. So just to say, just the housing stock that we're talking about, that drives the density, that drives the RTS meters, but it doesn't say you're not going to have meters in all sorts of housing stock. We've just got some sort of general guidelines to talk about. And so just to talk quickly, and we can answer questions on this later. Supply capacity generally, when we're working across the region, will match the density of customers that each supplier has got. When we generate appointments to upgrade RTS meters, we will match that demand with available resources in those areas, and there'll be some work behind the scenes to see whether or not, obviously, we can bunching up more than one visit in a day in certain areas. For example, those 200 meters in Anglesey, if a supplier's got 100 of them, then it may well be looking to coordinate a visit to make sure there are resources up there over a specific period to save going back and forth too much. If you want to pop onto the next slide, Ben, I think this is certainly of interest to many people on here. If you are looking to understand whether or not your area is particularly impacted by this, then I've just stuck a little league table on here by local authority. And this of course shows you those areas where actually it might make sense to do some coordinated local activity working across Cardiff, and I've spoken to colleagues in Cardiff Local Authority, Cardiff City Council already about the work that they're doing here. And of course, when you go down to the bottom of the table, this impacts the way we approach the engagement problem as well. You know, right down there, 90 customers in Wrexham. We've got to get to those 90 customers. Okay, those 90 customers may not, because of the way that we're working here, may not see, you know, above the line marketing activities. Yes, we do have a national marketing campaign on this. It's directed to the areas with the densest populations of RTS meters, and we're serving up content through digital channels based on how many RTS meters and RTS customers we've got to get to. So in Wrexham, for example, we know that we can work through local partners to make sure that when those questions come from those customers, that they've got someone to talk to about it. But they may not have, you know, posters on the bus stops and all those sorts of things going on, because it all depends on how dense these meters are. So generally speaking, they'll be anticipating questions on this data. It's something that we are looking to refresh on a regular basis. It's something that at this sort of level, broken down by local authority, broken down by MP constituency, and other ways of looking at it, postcode district, that sort of thing. We're trying to look to share this sort of information through the Ofgem toolkit that we'll talk about, so that you can keep tabs on, just by going through to the available data, you can keep tabs on this sort of level of data and how many customers are still impacted in your areas. And just to finish off, I think on a note around collaboration here, this the ability to talk to the data at this sort of level has been very, very useful in having conversations with partners in local areas. We are very keen at Energy UK to be able to leverage the local wisdom and knowledge that there is in our organisations from local authority and downwards. There'll be local charities, local energy co-ops, hyper-local organisations that support customers around these sorts of conversations where, let's be frank, sometimes they're wanting to talk to their supplier about it. And so we would very much recommend and welcome contact from local organisations to support the messaging, to support what's going on in these areas, to support those customers to understand that this is something that is important, that they're impacted, and that they need to get through to their supplier to arrange an appointment. Thanks, Ben.
That's fantastic, David. Thank you. And just to clarify as well, David and Mark will be available throughout the Q&A at the end. If you do have any questions, the slides, as we said, will be shared. It seems evident, as you said, David, from these numbers that Cardiff has the highest number, which, as you say, matches probably with population density, quickly followed by Pembrokeshire and Ceredigion and Carmarthenshire in West Wales, and then Powys in Mid Wales. And it strikes me as well, but there'll be other colleagues on the phone with a keener eye than me, but of all the areas in North Wales, I think Gwynedd, it seems, has the highest number. But this table will be shared with with everybody on the call after too. So that's very, very, very helpful. Thank you. Just moving forward then, I think given the importance of this issue, we need to understand, of course, then how you actually tell if you or somebody you're working with or support has an RTS meter. Lots of people might not know, of course. So the first thing to say here is that your electricity supplier will get in touch with you to arrange an upgrade before the end of June. And in fact, they should have already been in contact with you by the end of December. So all customers should have already received a letter from their supplier, as it says in red on the slide there. But if you're unsure, and we would understand that if you are, and many people are, there are a few indicators or things to look out for. So first of all, you may have a separate switch box near your Radio Teleswitch meter with a Radio Teleswitch label on it. If you do, that'd be a very good indicator, of course, that you may be affected by this. But you may also have an RTS meter if your home is heated by electric or by storage heaters. You may have an RTS meter if there's no gas supply to your area, and that may be because you live rurally, and David touched on that, but it also, as David said, maybe because actually you live in an urban area like Cardiff in a block of flats. And you may also have an RTS meter if you get cheaper energy at different times of day. They may be through tariffs like Economy 7 or Economy 10, Economy 7 being an example of when you get 7 hours of cheaper electricity overnight, and then it's more expensive during the day, and you typically combine that with things like electricity storage heaters. Or you may have another tariff called Total Heat, Total Control, which until about last week I'd never heard of myself. But the only way to find out to be sure is by contacting your electricity supplier. Suppliers have to make sure that a suitable meter is installed and that your service is not disrupted. And the energy regulator Ofgem, who we'll hear from shortly, expects electricity suppliers to replace all RTS meters before the 30th of June. And it's very important that they do. You know, understandably, our primary concern here is that the impact the switch off may have, or any delays in replacing meters may have, on low income and vulnerable households across the country. So we're in regular engagement with UK government, with Ofgem and Energy UK on the issue, as well as raising awareness with the Welsh Government, the Senedd, and other key stakeholders across Wales, including yourself. So thanks again for joining. And I said the impacts are potentially quite serious. It's important because if the meters are not upgraded, people will lose service. Without the signal, meters will act unpredictably, and potentially they'll be left without any heating or hot water, so they could lose access to heating altogether, or they might find their heating is constantly on, in which case things can get very expensive very fast. And both scenarios are potentially very serious, of course, not least because we already have up to 600,000 households across Wales estimated to be living in fuel poverty, including virtually all our lower income households, many of whom find themselves in deep, severe fuel poverty, of course, too. So it's vital that people contact their supplier for an upgrade or respond to a call to action from their supplier if they've already had a letter. Typically, an upgraded solution will be a smart meter, and Ofgem and Energy UK colleagues can talk to this more perhaps in the Q&A. I know it's certainly something that came up in the meeting we held on Thursday with England colleagues. But where a smart meter is not an option, alternative technical solutions can also be arranged. And as I said earlier, suppliers must make sure you've got a suitable meter installed and that your service is not disrupted. So how can you help? Well, let me hand to Jamie from Ofgem to discuss Ofgem's campaign, work of the task force, and Ofgem's work with Jamie, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ben, and David as well, for that overview of the RTS situation in Wales. I think probably up top, before I get into the work of the task force, it's important for me to say that for Ofgem, the replacement of RTS meters and upgrading them is a critical priority. I think our role, to put it into some context for those on the call, is to hold suppliers to account for delivery and ensuring and focusing and prioritising the resource for RTS consumers. So as David mentioned there, it's about ensuring suppliers have appropriate processes in place to flex their resource to meet demand where required, and ensure that customers that reach out and engage with our supplier comms campaigns, Ofgem's comms campaigns, are able to secure an upgrade and a meter replacement as fast as possible. So Ofgem has been fairly kind of concerned about the slow progress over a year out from switch off. And last year we stepped in to bring industry together along with Energy UK and lead from the front in terms of forming the RTS task force, which in September or early October last year launched a call to action, which put in place commitments regarding the prioritisation and resourcing for RTS across all suppliers. So the task force is comprised currently of Ofgem, Energy UK, distribution network operators and suppliers as well. And we meet on a regular weekly basis, discuss operational matters and comms and media activity as well. But essentially the crux of this call to action really put an onus on suppliers to contact all their RTS customers by the end of 2024 and kind of outline what support and meter upgrade options were available to customers. As Ben talked about there, it's part of suppliers' obligations through law to ensure that our customer has an appropriate metering arrangement in place. And that's what we've been kind of clear with our expectations on suppliers, that it's up to them to ensure that those customers left behind are as a result of the RTS switch off. So what we ask suppliers to do as part of that call to action is to contact all customers by the end of the year 2024 and for them to put in place the resource to service these customers in terms of meter upgrades when the customer gets in touch with them, or they get in touch with the customer. Our expectation is for suppliers to have a solution available. So what we did was we asked suppliers to provide what we termed RTS action plans, which was another commitment outlined in the call to action, where we asked suppliers to detail their capacity approach to RTS replacement, and we monitor the progress on a monthly basis to ensure that suppliers have enough adequate capacity to fulfill appointments. So what I would say here in terms of the organisations on the call, they're varied, is that if you're on the ground there, you're having problems seeking an appointment, an installation, or facing barriers to an RTS upgrade, then feel free to report any instances of this through the NEA to Ofgem. We can obviously refer and help where we can. So just to give you a flavour, obviously it's not Ofgem without us talking about licence conditions, but there are a few in there that already exist to kind of protect consumers. So SLC 0 requires suppliers to treat customers fairly. 4 requires suppliers to efficiently and effectively identify risks of consumer harm and mitigate against any risks. And SLC 39 requires suppliers to replace meters as part of the overall smart meter rollout. So what we have there already existing is provisions which compel suppliers to, as obligated by that licence, to replace RTS meters in a timely and efficient manner. And whilst these obligations are clear and incentivise the replacement of RTS, what we're doing as of tomorrow, we'll be publishing a consultation on potential RTS-specific licence conditions, which focus on underpinning those existing ones and making them a bit more robust to ensure that no consumers experience detriment as a result of upgrades. So we'll be looking within this consultation to consult on the appropriateness of an RTS meter post switch off from the 30th of June, as well as the tariff offerings and availability to customers that seek an upgrade, because we want to make sure we're in a place there with suppliers where suppliers aren't leaving a customer no worse off in terms of the tariff arrangement. So I've kind of covered kind of Ofgem's role there on the RTS replacement upgrade. I'll kind of move into a bit of the work of the task force and what we've been doing as a collective alongside industry. So whilst we are the regulator and we're there to hold suppliers accountable, what we've done is work with suppliers, Energy UK, Smart Energy GB to help launch the national awareness campaign, as well as some local hotspot activity alongside EUK and Smart Energy GB. The national awareness campaign, as some of you may have seen already, so these feature targeted adverts via television, VOD, video on demand, YouTube as well, where Lorraine Kelly explains the RTS switch off and the urgent need for consumers to take action ahead of the June deadline when they are contacted by the supplier, or if they get in touch with the supplier, what their expectations should be and what the impact is of not seeking an upgrade to an alternative metering arrangement from their existing RTS meter. So this activity has been supplemented by local press, national targeted radio clips as well. And all of this is kind of complemented by an RTS toolkit, which was developed by my media and comms colleagues. And that is essentially populated with a range of materials support organisations and individuals understand what RTS is and why it needs to be replaced. And all these RTS toolkit and materials are available in Welsh language as well format. So this also includes a kind of continually updated Q&A document where we basically answer FAQs for use by anyone. We utilise this monthly, update it on a regular basis. And what the intention of this FAQ document is to ensure that organisations such as those in the calls have got the necessary information at their fingertips to help direct any inquiries you might get from service users, customers, to ensure that you can sufficiently answer any concerns they have about seeking a RTS replacement upgrade. And what we've seen as a result of the RTS task force inception in last year is more than a doubling of RTS meter replacements and improvements in the availability of resource directed towards RTS replacements. But I think we're not naive to the task. There's still a way to go. As we mentioned, there's around 15,000 in Wales, but throughout the rest of the country as well, there are large hotspots there. And for Ofgem, it's about us ensuring that we've got suppliers accountable in order to provide the engineer resource, which we're told is there to ensure that customers that seek a replacement are provided one. We don't want to see any further kind of challenges, blockers. We want to see a smooth customer journey for all those customers that engage with the programme and do what they've been asked to do and fulfil their part of the bargain, really. So that's why we're kind of ensuring through the action plans, the collaboration with the task force and Energy UK, that we can work together to ramp up replacements, but also, whilst we'll talk about replacements in the back end, we're also focusing on support and mitigations that can be offered to customers ahead of the switch off as well. As I mentioned there, that includes tariffs, availability of technical solutions, and the like, and ensuring no one is essentially left behind as a result of RTS upgrade as of the 30th of June 2025. So that about covers it from me, so I'll pass back to Ben now, and I'm sure we can answer any questions that you may have.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jamie. And as Jamie's alluded to, we've got the links to the toolkit and other resources available on the slides too, which, as I say, will be shared. Links to Ofgem's website there, as well as details on Energy UK's website. There's also a page on National Energy Action's website, which is translatable if you're supporting anybody who does not have English, perhaps, for example, as their first language, using our digital accessibility tool called Recite Me. And in addition, Citizens Advice also has some information about Radio Teleswitch service and the switch off on their website too, as you can see there. And both David and Jamie have alluded to obviously being able to get in touch both with NEA and with Ofgem. So we'll share these contact details as part of the slides too, and we can pop them into the chat perhaps as well if that's helpful. But just email markets_stakeholder@ofgem.gov.uk. And if you want to get in touch with National Energy Action, then please do feel free. We're keen to hear particularly if you come across any difficulties and things aren't working as they should, and you can email info@nea.org.uk to get in touch with the team there. So whilst I probably take an unduly long time to work out how to stop sharing my slides, I'll hand over to my colleague Danny to chair the Q&A.
Hi, thanks Ben, and thanks all for your contributions to that session. I think it's been brilliant so far and really insightful. I'm Danny Barnes. I'm Director of Development and Partnerships at National Energy Action. I can see that questions have already started coming in on the Q&A, and very helpfully both Jamie and David have already tagged a few that they're going to answer. Last week we had 122 questions come in on the England session, and I'm pleased to see that we're only on around 10 or so thus far, because it was quite challenging to go through them last week. So thank you, and that is not a challenge to you all to kind of reach the 120 mark. So if it's okay, we'll start with actually the top of the list, if that's all right, around people who don't necessarily want to have a smart meter. Will they be forced to have one? Jamie, I know that you've tagged that one as being open to answering it.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it as a regulator that monitors supplier performance of smart meter rollout. I guess what is important to say here is that while smart meter is in almost the majority of cases the solution for an RTS meter upgrade, because it provides access to a range of newer tariffs as well as time of use, which can mirror the RTS replacement meter. I think what we've been clear with and suppliers, and our expectation is that no customer should be left behind. Therefore, it is essential that the supplier provides options for an alternative appropriate arrangement. So if you've got a customer there that is a smart meter refuser, I would say make sure they engage with a supplier to understand their options. I can't speak for the individual suppliers and what they have in terms of what they've got in the back of the van, but our expectation is that they ensure that a customer doesn't receive detriment that's engaged with the RTS program. So whether that's a smart meter or another alternative meter, it's really on the supplier, the individual supplier. So I would say speak to the supplier to understand the options. But our expectation is that they should be utilising a range of solutions to support the customer, whether that's smart or otherwise. So to answer the question there that Jerry said, is it does not have to be, they do not have to accept a smart meter. There should be alternative arrangements there.
Yeah. Thank you, Jamie. I guess from our point of view, it's also important to know that they understand a bit more about the reasons for refusing a smart meter and make sure that they're founded in kind of an honest basis rather than people perhaps being misled by negative media or negative publicity that might not always be entirely accurate. But providing that's been the case, obviously there will be other options available to the customer if they remain objectionable to having a smart meter. Going on to the next one, David, I know that you're going to answer this one around RTS customers that are digitally excluded. I think Jamie, you mentioned the kind of wider media campaign, and I'm aware Lorraine Kelly has been supporting with that as a trusted voice. Is there anything else we want to comment on around the campaign for those that might be digitally excluded?
Yeah, just to describe that that national campaign in with a little bit more colour. You know, it's a budget that's been put together by suppliers with and granted to Smart Energy GB as the experts in marketing smart meters thus far. And there's another question around whether we're marketing smart meters here or not, which I think we'll come on to later in the Q&A. Very meticulously planned and targeted in a way that reflects things like digital exclusion. However, that targeting on digital exclusion has led to a great example, the advert that Lorraine Kelly featured in going out on television to Scottish viewers, but not to English and Welsh viewers. Now, my understanding is a little bit rusty in how marketing and campaign buy works, right? But you target your money at the most effective, what you think is going to be the most effective bang for buck. And so there was an understanding of digital exclusion in Scotland and a large number of customers to get to, and therefore that led to one channel being this TV buy. That didn't happen in Wales, okay? And so there is more of a reliance on those digital channels, I have to say. Apart from, of course, the one very targeted channel that we do have, which is suppliers writing directly to the consumers. And suppliers are the only ones here, and I'm including Energy UK in this. We don't know exactly which customers are affected. We have the data down to postcode level, but not address level, okay? So suppliers know which customer affected, and they have been writing to their customers and emailing, of course, whichever channel works with those customers. And so I would say that we are more reliant in Wales on that particular channel than we might be in lots of others, because, as I say, we won't be buying posters at bus stops, and we won't be putting out radio and TV stuff other than possibly stuff that you can target much better, which is people on demand, you know, on demand television and stuff like that. So I think there's a plea there, a plea to organizations on this call to understand that when having conversations with customers who think they may be affected and not quite sure, if they have heard from their supplier, then yes, it's a real thing. They are impacted. On top of that, we are, as suppliers, looking to experiment with a different sort of way of branding, which we've not done before, but Ofgem have kindly lent their brand to this whole issue. And we are currently sending out, in some areas, dual branded or even single branded communications over and above those toolkit assets and leaflets that you've seen on the screen just now and will be available to your organizations to see whether or not actually, if this is a trust issue with suppliers, can we brand it differently to let them know that this is more of a sort of an informational type campaign rather than anything else? We're not trying to sell smart meters here. We are trying to get you over the line of a potential disruption to your heating and hot water. So I think the short answer is please, with your support, to get those messages to customers. They're unlikely to see lots of the national campaign stuff out and about, particularly in areas where there are smaller numbers of total RTS meters. 200 out of 30,000 households in Anglesey. It's not where the money's going to go, for example, to get above the line visible campaign materials out there. It will come through suppliers most likely, if anywhere else.
Fabulous. Thanks, David. And just reiterating earlier, the toolkit that has been put together is available to all stakeholders, and we will be sharing the link after the webinar. So you will have access to those materials and tools to support you with any direct engagement that you might do with your client group. David, another one for you, if you don't mind, and then I'll give you a bit of a break. There's a question around the postcode areas and the data,
Yep, sure.
and to what degree we can kind of focus in.
Absolutely. So I mentioned that I'm going to be putting together the aggregated rundown. This is information that is provided by individual suppliers to us at Energy UK. We chunk it all up and run it through our database, which allows us to allocate the local authority and things like that. Now, postcode areas, it's unlikely we'll give you full. The more granular you go, the harder it gets, of course, with small numbers of customers impacted. But I will do whatever I can to get you the most granular level of data, and that may be down to postcode outcode. So that's the first chunk of the postcode, to see the count in that particular area, and that's what that red and white map was based on. We first saw in the slide there, and I'll give obviously the refresh breakdown by other ways of breaking up the local authorities, the MP constituencies, ward within local authorities might be useful as well, and we'll be naming that you recognise much better than I do in terms of how those different areas of a particular town or area might be broken down. So it will be there. It won't be access to the live searchable database that I have, but I will do my best on a monthly basis to refresh that and get that out in lists so that you can look by your area and have a look at how those numbers are changing going through.
Fabulous. Thanks, David. The next one, Mark, I think is going to come to you actually, and it's around some of the alternatives to smart meters, particularly, for example, when smart metering won't work because of communication challenges. Could you give any more detail? I appreciate it is a bit of a case-by-case basis, but what some of the technical solutions might look like for those consumers?
So, as Jamie intimated earlier, that there are obligations on suppliers to provide appropriate metering, and that includes smart meters or non-smart meters, so meters working in dumb mode as well. We have solutions to all of the technical challenges that we've seen across Great Britain so far. We've not come across a situation where we are unable to provide a solution. And I'll just reiterate the message: please contact your supplier and just for the individual consumer to discuss the options with their supplier. They will be able to help.
Brilliant, thank you. So there's a question around the on and off peak switchover times and the impact that the switch off may have. Ben, I think you've noted that you'd be happy to answer this one.
Yeah, no, happy to, and yeah, and colleagues can jump in to add anything that they might want to. But yeah, fundamentally, the Radio Teleswitch service uses a radio signal to tell those older electricity RTS meters when to switch between their on and off peak rates. So without that signal, when it switches off from the 30th of June 2025, those meters will no longer work properly. So they'll be unpredictable, and different people may experience different impacts. So some may find that they lose access to their heating and hot water entirely. Others may find that their heating ends up being permanently on, neither of which obviously is good. So yes, please do get in touch with your supplier if you're concerned that you may be somebody affected.
Yeah. Did anyone else want to comment? Happy with that one, fabulous. The next question is around the upgrade. So we know that smart meters should be fitted for free to the consumer. There should be no charge at the point of install. There is a question around the obligation from the energy company to provide an upgrade for free. So just to be clear to everybody on the call, it should absolutely be free in all circumstances. However, we do know that there may be some instances where there may be additional works required. And in that instance, it's really important to be well cited on any local schemes or funding that might be available. And we committed at the England session last week to try to kind of map out a little bit more on what some of those funding options might look like. Because for example, a case study that we had last week was around asbestos backboarding and who becomes responsible for the removal of that to enable the upgrade to take place. So there may be the occasional incidents where there may be some works required to enable the upgrade. It's almost like enabling works, and being clear on the sort of funding availability there is a priority to us. And we know there are some grants and schemes. And David, I think you spoke a little bit about this last week. If you're happy to kind of reiterate what we talked through last week, that'd be great.
Sure. Yes, this is one of the big live issues that Ofgem and suppliers are working through together, and the idea that thus far in smart rollout there's what we call minor works, where some little bits and pieces about fixing meter cupboard doors and those sorts of bits and pieces, where we've got the suppliers, we've got the wherewithal on the van to go and get that done while we're there. We'll go ahead and do so, but there are obviously, as Danny described, various scenarios where within the remit of the customer's premises, or the owner of the property's premises, there are works that may need funding in order to accommodate a change to a new meter. And so we recognise that given the different nature of this, the urgency of getting through to getting an upgrade for these customers in the time we've got left, then we need to be a bit more active in facilitating those sorts of conversations. Now, we've pulled together the lists of the common grant funding areas, but we also think there's a need to be carrying on discussing other avenues to fund some of these works, and I think it's just a live topic that hopefully in some weeks' time we'll have a much clearer answer to. But what we don't want is customers in a situation where they are facing a bill for hundreds, or in some cases, unfortunately, thousands of pounds for work to their property, just so they can get the meter changed. So we recognise the need to move that issue along much quicker than has been done with smart in the past, because smart is something that essentially you can opt out of.
Fabulous, thanks, David. Jamie, I'm going to come to you if you don't mind, around particularly more vulnerable consumers who might be registered on the Priority Services Register, and any additional proactive comms or engagement that might be in place to make sure that we really reach out to those people who might not simply understand the need for urgency, or may have additional complexities which makes it harder for them to engage with the supplier, perhaps.
Yeah, we've asked suppliers to make sure that they've clearly identified those consumers that overlap between the PSR and RTS meters. And what we've told them to make sure they've got in place is specific customer journeys for PSRs, taking into recognition the points that the person that's made the question there is that they may be in specific circumstances where they're less likely to engage with a supplier. That needs to factor into the communication channels that these suppliers are using. So what we're hearing is that kind of alternative customer journeys are being developed, which ensure that the right people talk to this customer, or they use maybe named individuals which support this customer. They get in touch with them. They use a variety of means, such as letter writing, as David touched on there. Ofgem has lent its brand to ensure the provision of postcards and letters to go through the door. Obviously, there will be some customers. I saw a question there mentioned that some are less likely to answer to open letters from the supplier, which is why we've kind of added our brand. But it's also got to the stage where we consider suppliers to be using approaches such as door knocking, or going to kind working through the individual partners, community organisations, attending events in person to speak to these maybe hard to reach individuals. Our expectation has really been clear that it's not just the normal customer journey of this customer should be proactive and get in touch with a supplier. Like there needs to be plans in place to support everyone, not just the average customer. So yeah, it's a key priority really for us in terms of how people are engaging with this customer cohort, and ensuring that the PSR and potentially vulnerable customers are supported to facilitate a replacement.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. I think that also feeds into a question from a colleague, Rebecca, around what the supplier comms has looked like and how has it been tailored to make sure that people understand the seriousness. David, did you want to come in a bit on that as well?
Yeah, just briefly, I think of this as an evolution. Some suppliers have been writing to these customers for some time, year to a couple of years now, maybe more, some of them, depending on when their own smart rollout programs factored in these customers. Other customers will have only been contacted for the first time just before Christmas. However, when we talk about the evolution, it's likely that the RTS meter has been used as the reason for that exchange. But what's happened over time is that as suppliers, we've sort of withdrawn a little bit from trying to roll this up as a smart replacement, because what we learnt from feedback is that that's not the way to go about this, and we were finding that the smart upgrade message in many cases was turning customers off, and they were ignoring on that basis. And so we've pared back very much of course, smart is the answer here, but we're not marketing smart as part of this. We are going forward with a message that your RTS meter needs to be replaced, and here's the reasons why. Now, we've had obviously plenty of feedback from various organisations about that, and we have to be very careful around when we can be seen to be being a little bit too aggressive, scaremongering, and there are different views on whether or not we should be using I'll use someone else's term here, the language of fear, to get customers over the line on this. But in reality, we're open to all suggestions. We've tested lots of different ways of doing things, and it's likely that this will continue to evolve now as we move towards June. Some suppliers, for example, are now starting to implement a sort of a countdown message in their comms that are going out, and so it's now from this point onwards a case of repeated communications, repeated different channels, trying the different branding, as we've said, and seeing whether that increasingly ramped up message as we get towards June, and we get the number of customers lower with each month that passes. We think we will have to be a bit more forthright in some cases.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. So the little cluster around kind of the comms at the supplier side here. So I guess one question, which I think again from my colleague Rebecca, is around will there be flags on account? So let's say customer with an RTS meter phones up, but for nothing related to an RTS meter, will there be that proactive ability to identify, right, hang on a minute, we need to be having a conversation about an RTS meter upgrade with this customer? Will there be a flag on their account?
So I can't say yes for every single supplier, but what I will say is my knowledge of the way that supplier metering and smart metering campaigns work is that most of their customer relationship management systems have built-in functionality which actually pops up on the screen when the incoming call comes in. Some people call it best next action. If you call me and want to talk about your bill, I have something that pops up on my screen. I say, oh, actually, I need to talk to you about RTS meters. So the functionality is all built into these systems. So generally speaking, yes, the answer is when a customer rings about whatever they want to talk to the supplier about, it is likely that the flag will come up and let the call handler know that they also need to talk to them about a smart upgrade or an RTS upgrade, or whatever it is that is factored in as an important information piece that customer needs to know about. Can't say 100%, but I'm going to say generally speaking, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. The next question is around sort of the capacity at supplier side to kind of handle these calls. Do we know if there's been additional investment in capacity on the supplier side, but also training and upskilling? I know I've spoken to a couple of suppliers more recently, and they have confirmed that their call centre staff have been trained on this issue, and similarly that in some instances they've actually got call routing on the phone number from the customers that they know are RTS meter customers, i.e. if that customer calls in, they'll be directed to a team that absolutely knows what to do with the RTS switch off. But do we know a bit more around the comms? Is that universal? Is there additional capacity being built in to support with this? Mark, I've seen you take yourself off mute, so I'm going to come to you on that one.
So as David's just said, there are a lot of the energy suppliers do have dedicated RTS teams, and you will be routed directly to them. What we do know is that we are doing in the order of 250,000 smart installs a month currently, and so that is more than enough capacity in the town we've got left to be able to replace all of these meters throughout Great Britain. What we do need is for those customers to let us in so we can actually do the work. That's the biggest barrier that we are facing here. We have technical solutions for all of the scenarios, as I said before. Even in the cases, and I know there's a question around non-communicating sites, we have solutions that we can deploy in those scenarios as well, no matter where they are in the country. So there are solutions for every scenario. Please encourage your clients, your consumers to contact their suppliers to get this meter upgrade organised as quickly as possible, because the closer we get to June, the more problems we may have with capacity as more and more people leave it to the last minute. We really want to avoid that.
Just following on from that, Mark, there's a nice segue into one of the other questions, which is around how many of the meters have already been replaced thus far.
More than half currently.
Yes, thank you. Question from Kate Cunningham around the risk of households who think that their supply has been unaffected, and then in real terms it has been, and they've ended up being charged on peak during off-peak times. If this happens, will there be an obligation for energy companies to firstly let people know that that instance has happened, and also be eligible for a refund? I know there's a lot of live discussion around this issue happening with the task force. Over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, there's discussions ongoing, but I think when it comes down to it further down the line, our expectation is that for those customers that maybe still have a RTS meter, we're obviously still deciding on this position, is that we would expect them to be consulting their billing arrangements to ensure that customers aren't no worse off as a result where they've not been able to facilitate a replacement. And we'll, as I mentioned before, we are consulting on kind of tariff arrangements for consumers, which will come out tomorrow. And our expectation there is, if obviously you'd like to respond to the consultation, is to put that in writing to us, so that we can take it away and start to formalise provisions that we're going to ensure are in place for customers following the switch off. So that will be ensuring that they are not kind of worse off. Their billing and their tariff arrangements are changed and altered so that they're not stuck on peak rates and are overcharged. These are the considerations we're given to make sure that customers are able to ensure that they are not left with a big bill as a result of potential inaction on the supplier side when they've taken the necessary steps to engage with a supplier and try to facilitate a replacement. We want to make sure that they are no worse off as a result there.
Fabulous, thanks, Jamie. Next one is around kind of data visibility as we get closer and closer to the end of June deadline. Will you have sort of access to quite granular data around when every individual within any kind of local authority area may or may not have switched away from RTS, to then enable partners perhaps, or the suppliers, to support individual homes a bit more directly and proactively, if we can really kind of get down to that granular level? I appreciate GDPR will kind of come into this, but welcome any thoughts, David.
I think the individual homes part is the difficult part, because that requires a sharing of the customers' details with a third-party organisation. So whilst I think it would be wonderful if it gets to a point where we know we've got 30 customers to get to in a particular area, and there's a local energy related organization who's willing to go and have those conversations, it's always going to be difficult. Never say never. At the moment, we're going to be sort of tracking the decline of the numbers through those aggregated by postcode, outcode, or by ward or whatever else, as we go through. But open to all ideas within legal bounds to support that sweep up of those final customers.
Thanks, David. Is it possible to have visibility of any of the examples of the letters that have gone out from suppliers? There's a couple of questions within the Q&A around having that visibility might enable partners to have a bit more sort of direct conversations that are relatable to the actual letter that the client might have received.
But I'd have to go back and ask. It's something that if there's a couple of willing suppliers to say, look, here's our latest letter that went out, and we'll vanilla brand it and stick it in the toolkit. That will be one option that I can think of that we could do that. So a folder in there that says example supplier to consumer letters, for awareness rather than for, well, feedback's all welcome, right? But for awareness, so that yeah, if we can get 2 or 3 of those in there, at least folks will know the message that's gone out. And as I say, that will evolve further as we go through the coming months.
Fabulous. And there's a similar question to, did somebody else want to come in then? No. The similar question to last week around how firm is the June switch off date. Obviously, we recognise that the date has been extended a couple of times, and our understanding is that June 30th date is immovable now. That is the deadline that we are working with. Go on, Mark, please come in.
Absolutely. Yes, we have been through a couple of extensions to this service, but just to reinforce that there is no more extension possible. This is really old system. It was built in the 1980s. Some of these meters have been on the wall since the mid-80s and just need replacing. We just need to get this done and get your help in making sure that we can get it done before the switch off starts in June.
Thank you. Do feel free to jump in if I've missed any questions. I think I've got most of the group, so there might be a couple more. Just a couple of things. There are a couple of questions around the recordings and the Q&A from last week. Just to mention, we've not circulated those yet. We were waiting for this webinar to complete so that we can make sure that we bundle all of the information into one mail out to everybody. So tomorrow, take confidence. It will be out with you this week, I promise. And that will include the recording, the slides, and the toolkit from Ofgem as well. Are there any questions? The postcodes we've covered off.
Tony, there's a question about whether we could be kept abreast of the numbers in terms of how many are left to replace by county and local authority, so that folk know how many are going to be remaining as the deadline gets closer and closer. If that's possible, I don't know if somebody on the call would like to talk to that, but if that's possible, that seems like a very good suggestion to me, and something that we could potentially share through our newsletters or members newsletter or something with stakeholders by way of an example.
Yeah, I can jump in initially and then can to David. Suppliers report to us on a monthly basis their rate of replacement and kind of overall numbers to give us a picture. I think we will be potentially moving to every fortnightly data collection in the future, and whilst we don't go into that granular level data of local authority, it might be something we will consider going forward, and if we do, then I'm happy to share it. But I think David captures a snapshot every few months from suppliers as well, and at that level I don't know how accurate the most recent submissions are.
I'm on the cusp of having an up-to-date one for start of February, Jamie, and we're hoping to get that ability to cut it by location on a monthly basis from now on.
Thanks, David. There's a question in the chat around, the comment says, it's an obligation that the upgrade must take place, but the customer might have to pay for it, ? So just to be clear, there should be no cost to the customer for an upgrade here. In the majority of cases, the upgrade, the likely solution will be a smart meter or an alternative technical solution, where the customer either can't have a smart meter or refuses to have a smart meter. However, there should be no cost on the customer for that upgrade. There may be some unique circumstances where there are some specific enabling works that might be required, where they're minor, the supplier may be able to do them just there and then if it's things that they've got on the van. If they are more major works, the example I gave earlier was we have had a couple in the East Midlands where asbestos backboarding is still an issue, then there may be a cost. However, all attempts will be made to ensure that the customer is linked into a local scheme or initiative that can support with the cost, whether that be a hardship fund, a crisis fund. And there has been some work from the task force to try to map out what the different funding mechanisms might look like, and we'll be able to share those so that you can have access to that as well. Have I missed anything, David, Mark, Jamie, on that specific point? I think we've covered that throughout. Fabulous, thank you. Will there be a fast track process with suppliers or a specific helpline available for dealing with issues? Actually, it says post-June, but now and also post-June, probably relevant here, should a customer have the RTS switched off? An enabling mechanism for partners, particularly those trusted intermediaries, to reach out to suppliers where there are issues post switch off.
I'll take that. So I think it's an important one, particularly the post-June stuff that sits behind this question. Quickly on helplines, RTS-specific hotlines. Pre-June, we are talking to suppliers to work through whether all of them have or need to have a specific line, and what we are very keen on is any feedback from out in the wild as to difficulties that have come to pass as a result of them not having a specific line. For example, anecdotal feedback around getting through to a call center and them not knowing what RTS is. We need to know about that because we need to push it back to hopefully the relevant supplier, but generally we have a mechanism for feedback these sorts of issues to the suppliers, and I talk to them on a fortnightly basis about those sort of best practice operational issues to make this a smoother process for our stakeholders. That's pre-June. Post-June, I think there's something a little bit bigger behind this question. So this is, we know realistically, we know full well that there will be customers with RTS meters that have not had their upgrade happen by the time we get to the end of June. So what does that mean beyond that point? And Jamie's done a lot of work in the background to request operational information and plans that look beyond June, and to give the reassurance that the suppliers are monitoring the number of customers that they have there, and then talking about the numbers, how many are left just before we get to June, are able to address the concerns that there won't be the ability to respond quickly to those customers when they come through. So there will be customers who are sat for whatever reason waiting to understand whether or not they're impacted. Will my heating and hot water change? And then it does. And so that's the trigger for them, of course, to come through and talk to the supplier, or indeed their landlord or their housing provider or the local organization that they feel that they can talk to about their energy related issues. So there will be phones ringing from June onwards from customers that we've not been able to convert up to that point. And it's very, very important that suppliers have the ability to cater for those and turn those requests for visits around in short order, rather than the standard 3-week, 2-week smart appointment booking times that we're currently running to. And so those operational plans are something that I know Jamie's got a huge focus on at the moment, and as suppliers we are stepping through, making sure we are capable of doing it based on where we think these customers will remain beyond June.
Brilliant, thank you. Mark, I think this one comes back to you. I'm afraid there's a couple of questions still around understanding a bit more about the alternatives to a smart RTS upgrade, and if there's any more detail we can give around what the alternative technologies might look like, and what are the specific solutions and what they may look like.
So we have a number of tools in the toolkit to address these kinds of problems. We can use alternative communication methods. We know the DCC are developing an alternative to that. It probably won't be in time for use with the RTS switch off, but we are constantly developing solutions to these challenges so that we can use alternative communication mechanisms. We could also use a non-smart meter. As we've said earlier, there is no obligation on consumers to take a smart meter, and a supplier should offer an alternative to that. So we could have a non-communicating meter that is pre-configured to handle the peak and off-peak switching, for example. Those are the kinds of solutions that we can bring to bear.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Kathy, your question around the Q&A, absolutely, we will circulate. There are frequently asked questions within the Ofgem toolkit. What we're going to do is just cross-reference those with the questions that we've been asked today to make sure that we fill any gaps, and then we will be sure to share those. You may need to give us just a small bit of time because we did have over 100 questions last week, and then obviously a few today, but we will do our best to get those circulated ASAP for you. Just in terms of the enabling cost question that's come up a couple of times, will there be an expectation on suppliers to promote those to customers that are affected? My assumption would be yes, in the kind of responsibility to support customers effectively and fairly. But Jamie, did you want to come in on that? Should there be any cost to the customer, they should be directing them to all the available support options, right?
Yeah, that is right, and it's something I mentioned previously that discussions are ongoing in the background about whether any additional funding can be made available for where remedial works is required. So, as David mentioned earlier, we hope to have a bit more clarity on this in the coming weeks. And ultimately, the majority of cases, there will be no cost to the consumer. It will be a straightforward replacement. There may be at times where there's remedial works is required to help facilitate a replacement, and obviously there may be existing funding grant schemes available. But in addition to that, we're also considering with government what other potential further funding mechanisms we could potentially make available as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Jamie. How much engagement, I guess this could be to any of you on the call, how much engagement have you had thus far with local councils and local groups to support with this? I know, David, you talked about Cardiff Council particularly, but is there any other engagement that you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I've not had a huge amount, Danny. In Wales specifically, most of my time has been focused in Scotland and England so far. Really useful conversations with Cardiff, and I think this is a case where we are really just reaching out for help and a plea to, if those conversations can be then passed on, and if people want to reach out to you or to us and have a more detailed conversation, local authority by local authority, I'm happy to do so. I think the WLGA suggestion is a very, very good one if they want to have us along to have a session on this and see how we can collaborate. And I think some of the great examples are where we've done some hotspot work, for example, in Brighton, where we've used their knowledge of the local landscape. We've changed some of the toolkit assets to use local imagery, and we've launched local media stories with their knowledge of which papers and radio stations to go to, and which ones will have the most effective reach as well. So really looking to, obviously it's not easy to be talking to every single local authority and every organisation that's interested, which is why these sessions are so fantastic. But I think when I think of any organisation, then the local authorities tend to be a really great higher level umbrella mechanism for them to then cascade with the networks they have as well. So yeah, please do come through to us, and I will follow up with the WLGA if they'll have me.
Fabulous, thanks, David. I'm sure they will. So I'm going to address the last sort of question now, which I think we've then covered everything. Kate Cunningham comes in around the challenge for those households who are financially phobic and might struggle to open the letters, or there'll be a level of distrust because they've got energy debt, for example, that they're worried about. So what can be done to support them and prevent an escalation of their hardship? So I'd like to kind of put in my sort of 2 pence on this one. I think this is really where the trusted intermediaries on the call really come into their own, where we can effectively support those clients with directing them to the trust funds that we know exist, or the support that we can handhold them through the in process with engaging with their supplier, and then beyond that, hopefully then support them through the process of the RTS upgrade. I think that really is where this cohort of individuals on this call can really help enable those individuals to access the support they need as the trusted intermediary and the trusted voice on their behalf. But it is a challenge, and we know that is possibly a big barrier to people engaging in this. So really welcome everybody's kind of input and support with that. Anybody else have any comments that they wanted to provide in response to that question? Super. I'll assume I summarised that well enough then. Over to you, Ben. I think that's summarised all of the questions now. Thank you.
Fantastic, Danny. Thank you. And thank you very much to David and Mark and Jamie too for engaging, for everybody on the call. As I said, and as Danny said too, we will be sharing all of the recording, the slides, and the links to resources. So please do look out for that over the next few days. We'll combine it with the session from England just to make sure you get a full picture, because it's always easier to kind of look back at this stuff when you have it to hand in the fullness of time and go through it. So and then we'll share those contact details too, so you can get in touch with Ofgem and indeed with NEA if you have any further queries or spot any issues that you would like to raise to our attention. Suffice to say as well that we and wider colleagues will continue to engage with Energy UK and Ofgem throughout this process and keep you abreast and informed throughout that. We do want to make sure that there is ultimately a safety net for anybody that doesn't end up having their meter switched in time or in some way suffers a detriment. As Jamie said, we don't want to see people left with large bills or in any harm as a result of potential inaction on the supplier's side. So as soon as we learn more about that side of things, we'll let you know too. But otherwise, to keep up to date, I'll pop a message in the chat, but please do, if you haven't already, sign up to our newsletter or membership at NEA. Membership, there's a free offering for local authorities and charities and others, as well as an enhanced paid for one. But we also have a regular newsletter. The system for that is changing. So if you are already signed up, but you haven't resubscribed over the last few months, it might be worth doing so. So I'll pop a link to that in the chat, but otherwise just to say thank you very much for coming, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care.